Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this morning. I understand some of your colleagues are still on their way, but perhaps given now it's about 9:25, maybe we can start. Thank you for coming this morning. As you know that we understand there's a number of issues, of course, a lot of information that's out in the public space regarding the teaching fraternity, and in particular overall with the education sector. And given the information that we saw that was being circulated, some of them a lot of misinformation, some of them of course were a lot of misunderstandings about what we are doing in respect of the civil service reforms. But in particular with the teachers also, we wanted to clarify to you because you obviously come from one of the largest ministries. And in fact, in this year's budget, the education sector has been given the largest allocation. As per the sector, the education sector has received about $920 million. Of course, of which $170 million with the rebuild of the schools. But even if you take that out, it's very, very large and very substantial. Now, what I would like to do with your concurrence this morning is very quickly take you through the reform process, what we have done, and also provide some clarity to you in respect of the contracts, etc. And also, if we have, then I'll get Jane Curran, who is over here. Jane is the director of the Civil Service Reform Management Unit. Jane has been the one who's been largely responsible for and driving the job evaluation exercise, the disciplinary processes. And I'll get her to actually talk specifically to you about the salaries and how they're all structured and the various bands that you now have. As you know, that we've collapsed something like 24, 29 bands into about 15 bands. So she'll talk to you about that, and I'll then come back and talk to you about other things. I have told the PS yesterday specifically that I did not want anybody from the head office. I did not want the permanent secretary here or any of the administrators. I know some of the senior education officers are here because they are also affected by the salary scales. But the reason why I did not want the PS and the others here is because I want you to have a free, interactive discussion with us. We obviously have found, as I said, it was covered by the media last week. I went down to the Ministry of Education corporate workshop, which they held at the Pearl Resort. And over there I did speak to them, that was covered in the media, that they themselves have made some mistakes in respect of the contracts. We found when Jane was actually carrying out the assessment and the salaries, based on the size of the school and the number of teachers. Because as you know now, under the new system, as a head teacher, as a deputy head teacher, as a principal, as a vice principal, your salaries get affected by the size of the school, the number of students that are under you. So your salary scales actually gets affected by that, of course, because of the level of responsibility you're going to have. So the more responsibility you have, obviously, the more burden you have, you need to be rewarded accordingly. So that's what the system actually does recognize. And so they made some mistakes with that, and I actually highlighted to them, and I'll take you through those, some of the issues that we found with them. So I'd like it to be interactive, and please feel free to ask questions at the end of the session. And once we finished it all, I thought, given that I have a captive audience, I also wanted to take you through some of the key features that you need to know about regarding the budget too. Because you are teachers, you need to know what's actually happening in the economy. You can impart that knowledge to your students, and you yourselves may actually have some questions regarding that. So is that okay with all of you? Okay, great. Okay, so we'll start with this first slide, and I'll get Bernie to help me. I hope you can all see the slide. Now, the first thing is about retirement age. Now, everybody talks about retirement age. Let me tell you about retirement age. In 1987, retirement age was reduced to 55 years. It used to be 60. When Rambuka came in, he carried out the 87 coup, they reduced the retirement age from 60 to 55. Now obviously there was talk about as the reason why he did do that. They said because he wanted to get rid of a whole cadre of people. He did not want the civil service. But whatever the reason was, the retirement age was reduced to 55 in 1987. Then in 2000, it went up to 60 years again. And again, this was the Garase government. Apparently the reason at that time, they wanted some people to stay in the system. That's why they increased it from 55 to 60. So that's the history. And then of course in March 2007, when the Benny Marama government was in place, we reduced it to 55. This was actually challenged by the unions to say that the retirement age should not be brought down from 60 to 55. It went all the way to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal said no, the government has the ability to actually keep the retirement age or change the retirement age as it wills, because it is the employer. So it remained at 55. So the retirement age has been 55 since 2007. Of course, there is a provision there that any re-engagement is for position of declared scarce skills. So we've seen some people that have been re-engaged if there are those skill sets that are not available. And so the ability is there in the regulations. And then, of course, one of the reasons, of course, that we reduced the retirement age was 69.4% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. So most of you are in the minority if you're over the age of 40. I'm in the minority. The people who are below the age of 40 are the majority in Fiji. So we obviously have to be, mindful of that. If you look at the unemployment rate, it has actually dropped in Fiji. It's about 5.5 or 5.7%. But youth unemployment is much higher than 5.7%. And one of the reasons, of course, we have got some issues regarding how that information is gathered, but the reality is that youth unemployment still remains higher than the overall unemployment rate in Fiji. So that's the rationale that we do have, but as I said, the reality is that the reason there is an opportunity, if there are scarce skill sets, then we actually allow people to be re-engaged, but they need to have succession planning. Next, please. Now, as you know, we've talked a lot about civil service reforms. We've been saying that for the past few years. Civil service reforms is not only about salaries, but it's also about the terms and conditions of employment. It's about attitudinal change. I'm sure some of you have experienced that also. You as a member of the public, if you go and want to get a service from a particular government ministry, how do you get treated? Do your phone calls get answered? Those very basic things need to be attended to. And as you know, there's a lot of laxity around that. There has been a lot of laxity around that. There's also been a mindset in the civil service that I will only get the promotion depending on how many years I serve, as opposed to, say, if this gentleman, he's here, he's a really hard worker, high flyer, he's been in the system longer than him. The old mindset was because he's been in the system longer than him, then any promotion only he will get, because he's been there longer than him. As opposed to this person being a much better worker, he should also be given the opportunity to apply for the senior position, and he should also be considered as an equal candidate. But the old system has been that the more senior you are, you simply get the promotion. We've seen it's not necessarily perhaps relevant to the education sector, but we've seen, for example, you have somebody working in Ministry of Cooperatives, and they've been there for 10 years, they're a cooperatives expert, but they want to move along. But the way the salary structure was, it did not allow them the opportunity to move in a bigger band and get salary increases. The only way they could get salary increases was if their position title changed. So if I was a senior administrative officer in Ministry of Cooperatives, then if I want to get my salary raise, I have to become a principal administrative officer. So I may be trained in cooperatives, etc., but for me to get an increase in salary, then I might get a position in Ministry of Mangroves, and I'll go there because it gives me a principal administrative officer. So all those years of knowledge that I've gained as a cooperative officer is lost simply because I want to get a promotion. What we see overseas is that people become specialists. So even though they may be, for example, a WTO specialist or mangrove specialist, whatever it is, they stay in that career path without feeling the necessity to actually move out, because the flexibility is there within the salary bands for them to get increments within that position that they hold. So that's something that I hope I'm making myself clear, but please you can ask me questions. But that's one of the reasons also. But the other point, of course, is that we need to have improvement in salaries, working conditions, allowances. We'll be making some announcements today. Actually, I'll talk to you about that. We are now increasing the meal allowances. We're also looking at overtime, because at the moment the overtime is pegged at $24,664. If you earn less than that, only then you're entitled to overtime at the moment, the currency. Teachers, of course, are different kettle of fish, but the other people, they are, that's how they get treated. So we're actually looking at increasing that band to capture more people. But meal allowances at the moment is pegged at only $9. Now $9 may be okay in Reki, But $9 in Nandi is actually not very good, or $9 in Suva for a meal is not actually a good meal allowance. So we're actually looking at improving all of that. We'll be making some announcements in respect of that. Also similarly, as you know, that we've also increased the hardship allowance that teachers get when they go out to rural areas. We made the various demarcations on that and we're looking at improving that. These are very practical ways of improving the working conditions. And of course, the other one is fair and transparent decision making. I know in the Ministry of Education there has been issues. And in fact, as you know, that I publicly stated that the Ministry of Education has set up an internal disciplinary board, which we said was illegal. So we've removed that. And any of those decisions made by those boards are now appealable. And in fact, they all go through Jane. And she's sorted out many of that. So we've removed that sort of illegal position. Now also, of course, for example, if this lady here, if she decides to apply for, say, I don't know what position you hold, but assuming you're not a vice principal, but if you're a teacher, senior teacher, and you apply for a vice principal position, this whole row of people apply, and she believes that in the interview process or that the process itself was not fair, she can actually appeal the process. And that actually now goes to the Public Service Commission, has actually appointed a full-time commissioner to review all those decisions. Now, why is it that we have a commissioner from the Public Service Commission? Is because of the permanent secretaries. The permanent secretaries, ladies and gentlemen, are actually employed not by us, by the Public Service Commission. They pay the salaries. The contract of the permanent secretary is the Public Service Commission. So if this process is not clear, therefore, put it simply, the permanent secretary is goofed up. So that's why they have to go and make sure the PSC. So if the PS goofs up many times, there's a red mark against him or her, and of course they can be assessed or contracts can be terminated, etc. So you now actually have that appeal process. And OMRS, I mean OMRS is very, very important. A lot of people have, again, a lot of people have said to me that because some ministries are better at implementing it, others may not be better at implementing it. So, but the principle of it is very good. So what we've also said, if you look at it later on, the idea is that we want to be able to ensure that when we have panels now, you don't just have only 3 people from one area. So you actually need to have a cross-section of people sitting in the panel. You know, you don't get all the guys sitting together and, you know, assessing you. A clique. I know there's a clique. There's a bit of a mafia I'm beginning to discover in the teaching fraternity. I've also seen the way people interact when you are a teacher in a particular district and the person who's the, you know, the senior education or district education officer, when something happens, everybody makes morning tea and gives him or her tea and all of that. We need to get away from that. You need to be assessed on your merit, on your teaching capacity, on your teaching ability, not of how much you, butter up to the seniors. We need to get out of the way of thinking. I know the reason why many of you are laughing, because you know it's a fact. It does happen. So we need to move away from that. That's why I didn't want them to come today. So you can speak a lot more freely. Now, the other thing, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is that civil service, we want to attract and retain good people. We want to reward people. We have got a number of plans in respect to training, also getting some overseas training for a lot of the teachers. There is some work being done on the side. I don't want to mention too much about it in terms of how we can do, sister relationships with other ministries of education outside of Fiji, because we really want you to develop in your individual careers and give you the right tools in respect of not just being able to deliver what you are trained for, but also in making you a lot more comfortable to deliver your knowledge base, and we feel comfortable about that. In the same way, I mean, I'm kind of jumping ahead of some of the schemes, but the slides. But we've introduced the 7 student-free teaching days. Yeah, what do we call them, Jane? Student-free days. The student-free days. 7 days. And the reason why we've done that, this is practiced like in places like Australia. At the moment, the Ministry of Education can say to you, we want you to come on this Saturday during the term for some workshop, right? Or we want you to come on a Friday. It's inconvenient to you. You may have a family commitment, there are transportation issues, and for example, they say, okay, let's all the teachers in the Tailevu and Tasiri area, let's all gather in Nosori. People come during the day, at night, or whatever it is, it's very difficult for them. So what we are saying is that you now have the 7 student-free days during the holidays. So either just before the school starts, in term 1 or 2, or before the new year starts. So you don't get interrupted during the weekends during the term. So that way you're able to have that focus attention, and you're able to then of course plan your schedule for the rest of the year. Now of course we want to be able to respond and serve the public. I had a very interesting discussion last week when I met with the Ministry of Education head office staff at the Pearl, because there was this issue. They said some people question, because as you'll see that the head teachers and principals and vice principals actually are getting a bit of a salary hike depending on the size of the school. So obviously if you're a principal or a head teacher responsible for 1,000 students and 60 teachers, your level of responsibility is much higher than if you're a head teacher of a school that's got 80 students. There are some schools that have 80 students. So you obviously need to be rewarded accordingly. In the same way in the private sector, if you work as a teller, your salary is different. Even though you may be working as a teller for 10 years, your salary is different to the guy who's locked in a room and trading in foreign exchange. They may be out of university 3 years, but if they make a mistake, the bank can lose $500,000 or $1 million in one transaction. If the teller makes a mistake, maybe 10 cents is out or $1 is out. So the level of responsibility must be recognized. So some of the people from the Ministry of Education head office said to me, if you're going to pay the principals and head teachers such a high salary, how will we get them back into the Ministry of Education? Because the trend is that you get people out from the teaching cadre to come into the head office to then have those people assess the teachers and the head teachers, etc. You know how they do these assessments. I said, well, you should not cannibalize. The core function of the Ministry of Education, the core business of the Ministry of Education is to provide good teachers. The clients are the students. The secondary clients for Ministry of Education are you people. You are the clients. So they need to look after you so you can deliver the major objective of the Ministry of Education, which is a very good educational environment for over 220,000 students in Fiji. That mindset is what we want to change, and your ministry is a bit slow in the uptake of that, to be frank. So we need to change that culture. We need to change that culture. And that's what we want to do. So that's where we are coming from. Now, of course, like I said, the big picture is high-performing civil service, implementing government priorities, responsive to and serving the public. Next one, please. Now, as I've talked about the Open Merit Recruitment Selection, it was introduced in January 2016. Open Merit aims to ensure only the knowledge, experience, skills and abilities required for the job are considered in the assessment. Okay, a lot of people think that just because maybe I've got an MBA, therefore the person does not have an MBA, therefore I'll get the job. No. It actually is based on the whole range of issues that you need to be able to demonstrate in the interview. Now, as I said, recent change to further improve transparency. Panels for all positions must have at least one independent member outside the ministry. Some ministries are already doing that. Some ministries actually have a 4-member panel. So like I know in Ministry of Economy, they get some people from other ministries. Some people are actually getting people completely from the private sector to sit on the panel, to do a proper independent assessment. And in addition to the above positions, Band J and above have also one member from outside the civil service, as we discussed the senior positions. All panelists must be trained and understand the principles. As we've talked about this, the people who actually sit on the panel need to be trained under the OMRS system. They need to understand it themselves. Ministry of Education was slow on the uptake. Not many people trained in that, so we've now pushed them to get more of the people trained so they're then qualified to sit on the panel. I remember one of the ministries that I do look after, one of the persons who sat on the panel had not gone through training, and I rejected the recommendation they made for a particular person to be appointed. So they had to go through the entire process again. And as I mentioned again, the procedure review process is up and running. Appeals, Public Service Commission is the one that deals with that. I've also mentioned this as to why the Commission does do it, because the supervisor of the PS is the Public Service Commission. The review process is independent, it's paper-based process. You need to write it, put it in writing if you want it reviewed. Submit directly to the PSC. You don't go through your PS, you don't go through your SOE or whatever it is. you as an aggrieved party can write directly to the PSC. And they'll deal directly with you. You don't have to go through anybody. So you're getting rid of all those, those structures. So the ministry does not know. So if this lady is appealing, they won't know that she's actually appealed, and she does not actually have to tell them. She writes independently to them. Commission reviews the file, confirms whether all aspects of the process were followed. If not, it upholds the review. Process returned to the ministry to redo from the point where it contravenes the guidelines. So they won't say that, sorry, what's your name? That Ms. Below actually appealed. They won't, commission, if the commission finds a fault in the process, they won't say, oh, we actually got a review by Ms. Below, and therefore you need to redo the whole process. They'll just say, we found a problem with the process, you need to redo it. Because we don't want her to be victimized. So that's how we again keep the process cleaner and transparent. Commission has no constitutional authority to determine the merit or appoint an alternate person. So please understand that. Just because your review has been upheld, it doesn't mean they'll say, okay, Ms. Below, you can be appointed. You have to go through the process. But the fact is, if they uphold her process, the review, that she gets a fairer hearing. Okay? Next one, please. Okay, as I said, it was interesting. When we said OMRS needs to be implemented, the Ministry of Education was one of those ministries that said, we don't want to go under OMRS. Can we be exempt from it? The Ministry of Education did not want OMRS. So I'm being very upfront with you. So I'm telling you everything, because the whole idea is for you to know, you understand. And we said, no, you're not going to be exempt. Then, of course, we found that the HR and the management, there was a passive resistance. They stalled it for 6 months. Of course, we are, tightening the screw on the permanent secretary to ensure that it does happen. CSRMU offered to provide technical assistance. Ministry eventually agreed in June 2016, after 6 months. Advice was not accepted, process only partially implemented. So you have suffered from a very late implementation, unfortunately. The teachers have suffered from very late implementation of the OMRS, as opposed to some of the other ministries where they really grasped it and went ahead with it, and you can really see some very good energy in those respective ministries. But the energy in the education sector is not that fantastic, or has not been that fantastic. So we're trying to energize you. Again, we've identified the issues that are being discussed and of course being addressed, and I can tell you that they're now really going ahead with it full speed compared to what they were last year. Is this yours, Jane, or this is mine? I can do it. Sorry, what's the... Jane, when you put that up?
The vacancies that come about because of the more than 15% increase.
Oh yes, maybe I'll get you to do that, eh? Oh, no, use the next one. Yeah. Can you do the next one, please?
This one's yours.
Oh, okay. No, I'll do the next one. Okay. So the issue is, some of you have received positions less than 15%. Some of you have received, those positions have increased salaries of more than 15%. So wherever the positions, the salary increase is 15% or more, those positions are advertised. So it's not just the incumbents, but you're actually acting now. Those positions, people are acting on that salary, on that position now, under the new salary. But other people can also apply. For salaries that have positions that have a salary of more than 15%, it's opened up and people then apply for it. But of course, in the meantime, those positions are filled in by people acting on those positions. So they're already getting 95% of whatever the new salary is whilst you are acting. As I've said, automatic acting is to be put in place to ensure no disruption to the schools, and the contract and an acting letter is issued together by the ministry. So we are hoping that the advanced plan being prepared and advertised, so all those positions that do need to be advertised will be advertised in September. We have a staged approach from the top down. First job advertisements in October for take-up duty in April 2018, because you're a very large ministry. But in the meantime, of course, people act. Knowing the previous issue, changes made to ensure proper, transparent process in place for the jobs. So, for example, what we're doing, there's one particular agency in government that we were a bit unhappy about. And so what I do is that when the panel gives their recommendation, I actually get Jane to double check it, to ensure that they follow the process, to ensure that the right people are on the panel, to ensure that it was independent. So this is why we're saying it'll take a little bit longer, but the fact of the matter is that people are still acting until then, but we want to ensure that you actually get treated fairly and in a transparent manner. And of course, we had some contracts that had been issued by Ministry of Education, which we found problems with. They had contracts ending in the middle of the term. You can't have contracts ending in the middle of the term because those schools or those students will be left without a teacher, so that's quite silly. So it obviously has to end at the end of the term. There's some very practical issues, like I said, unfortunately, that we have to grapple with the Ministry of Education. To probably give you some good news, the PS has recognized the problem and has actually asked us, and we're getting some consultants, to restructure the Ministry of Education. Not you people, but the head office. How it can be restructured to make it a lot more modern. Because I think many of the positions there are still back from the 1970s. It's kind of just bureaucratic and it's kind of built up over and over a period of time. So there seems to be, I mean, our sense was, there seems to be more emphasis on the administrative side of things as opposed to emphasis on you people. And you are the core clients of the head office. So you're trying to get people to think along those lines. You are the clients of the Ministry of Education head office. Because they need to look after you, like I said, so you can then deliver the best service to the students. Next slide, please. Okay, like I mentioned, there was the Internal Staff Discipline Board. It had no constitutional authority. When it was brought to our attention, we immediately, as you know, that I issued a letter and I said it's unconstitutional. Get rid of this board. And any of the decisions that were made by the board, people could appeal it. Some were reinstated where the process was unconstitutional. Ministry will review all processes and ensure they're in line with the new guidelines. So the disciplinary guidelines is now been set up by the CSRMU, and they've been now also approved by the PSC because the permanent secretaries have to implement that. And you'll see, and Jai, we can talk to you about that, it's very, very positive. And it also ensures natural justice. We found a lot of the decisions that were made by the Ministry of Education, there was no opportunity given to the teacher to have actually a meaningful submission as to what actually happened. A lot of the decisions about the teachers' careers were made, you know, in a vacuum, or decided by people sitting in Suva, or just because some parent came along and said X, Y, Z, their word was taken without actually hearing from the teacher. So obviously under the new disciplinary guidelines, that's all, we've got rid of all of that. So you cannot have those kind of unilateral decisions being made. So the guidelines of the disciplinary process is that it's positive discipline, principles of natural justice in all investigation and decision making. Natural justice essentially means you are given the right to be heard, you are given the right to respond, and then of course that response is also then dealt with in an open and transparent manner. Improvements to supervision and management, training available. So sometimes, you know, a teacher may be pulled up for something, but it's not necessarily because they deliberately did it, it's probably because they did not have enough training in that particular area. So you identify, okay, this has happened because of X, Y, Z, you do not have exposure in this area, so you need to go and do this course, so you can then improve. You know, those are the kind of things that we need to do to improve people. We find that across the board, not just for teachers, but in all disciplines, in all the ministries. Of course, I want to hear also from you. As I said, training available, specific sessions organized for education, early July for August. Your suggestions welcome on how to improve communications of available training. We want to hear from you too, as to how do you think your training, what kind of training you require, can be improved. And also delays in the admin by the ministry, cancellations and low turnout. So these are the training sessions we found. That's what actually happens. So this is why we're given the 7 student-free days. So there can be focused attention on that, and it does not disrupt you with your normal teaching times or also your holidays. Okay, next please. Okay, contracts. The facts about the contracts. Your contracts are up to 5 years. The regulation says anywhere up to 5 years. So most of the people are getting contracts up to 5 years. Right? So teachers generally and nurses, you are 2 groups of people that actually are different, you're quite different to normal other civil servants. because you actually have a specific trained area, as opposed to, say, an accountant working in the Ministry of Economy. Accountants can very easily get work outside of Ministry of Economy, and also accountants also have a particular level of training that's not as specific as yours. The delivery of service, your delivery of service is very highly what I call public contact delivery of service. You teach over 220,000 Fijians, young students. The nurses, look after all the hospitals, the public hospitals. And also, of course, your ability to get work outside is very limited. I mean, there's only 11 schools in Fiji, 11 or 12 schools, that are entirely private. You have the 2 international schools, and you have these, some of these new Christian-based schools that are completely private. So they have their own curriculum. They have nothing to do with government. They don't get any funding from government at all whatsoever. So they do their own thing. But all the other schools in Fiji, even though they may be run by faith-based organizations, or faith-based organizations started them, or communities started them, different committees of different communities started them, you all can only get employment in that place. And we also require your skill sets to teach people. So this is why your contract's up to 5 years. And education, we've actually given you the max. With other civil servants, when they've signed their contracts, we've given them the balance of whatever term they have left. With you, we are starting you with 5 years again. Right? So assuming, again, in the sense, if you sign a contract today, it's for 5 years.
3 years.
No, what I'm saying, it can go up to 5 years or 3 years, whatever it is. With the civil servants, with the current civil servants, if a civil servant has been employed by, say, Ministry of Economy for 2 years, if they are given a 3-year contract, they'll be only given a 1-year contract to finish their 3 years. Do you see what I mean? I hope you understand the difference. Now, in your case, and this is one of the things that we're reviewing, this is one of the feedback we want to get, how many of you have been given a 3-year contract, or how many of you have been given a 5-year contract? We want to know that from you, okay? But the regulation actually states you can get a contract up to 5 years. So this is what we want to interact. But I'm telling you in principle what can be done. Also, because of the job that you carry, the job description that you have, when the 5-year contract ends, unless you've done something very untoward, you have an automatic right of renewal of contract. Okay? Let me clarify that. I know a lot of people think, oh, at the end of 5 years, I know some of the unionists have been going around and muttering words. The reality is this. At the end of the 5-year contract, when your contract expires, you will get an automatic right of renewal of the contract. Because, especially for teachers and nurses, because you have 2 specific skill sets and professions that is quite unique. Unless, of course, you've been spending half your time in the grog bowl, or you come to work late. There are people like that. There are many teachers like that. Hopefully not that many. So if you actually have a clean record, you have an automatic right of renewal of your contract. Now, the other issue is this. I put there no impact on ability to seek loans. I was quite astounded that last week at the Fijian Teachers Association AGM, there was a statement made by one of the officers of the association saying that because of contracts you cannot get employment. That's utter nonsense. Or you cannot get loans. That's utter nonsense. The banks have come out on previous occasions, and as you saw the next day, the banks all came out and said it does not stop your ability to get a loan. Before I had this job, I worked in the private sector too. I had a 3-year contract. I got a loan. I got actually 2 loans. So banks don't see that as an adherence, and I refer you to last week's Fiji Sun. There was a CEO of ANZ. There was a statement from Westpac. There was a statement from Bread Bank. All the CEOs are saying it does not stop your ability to get a loan. So that's a complete misinformation that's been spread. As I said, normal practice in the private sector, over 70% of the civil servants were already on fixed-term contracts prior to these reforms. There's only 30% that weren't on contracts. Nothing to fear is termination in accordance with discipline guidelines and natural justice. It confirms the fundamental shift in remuneration, not just a simple pay rise. is an offer, no pressure to accept or no impact on your current terms and conditions, but could affect your level of responsibility, which must match your salary. Okay, so this is what it means. If you don't sign the contract and you're currently on tenure, that's fine. But then whatever position you hold and the salary that you get will actually need to match up with each other. So that could effectively mean you won't necessarily have the same level of responsibility. You can get the same level of money, you won't necessarily have the same level of responsibility. Okay? So just understand this. If you don't sign the contract, your salary will not decrease. But your level of responsibility may decrease depending on which band you sit in now. And Jane will take you through that band. Okay, I hope this is clear? Okay. Next slide, please. Now, again, I just want to highlight contracts issues with the Ministry of Education. Ministry did not follow the job evaluation transition procedures. They did not do this. It included the rules for contracting the effective date. You know what I mentioned to you earlier on about when contract should end and when it should commence. The effective date, the beginning of first pay that commences in the month that the contract is signed according to the pay fortnights. Okay, so whenever you sign the contract, that's when it comes into effect, depending on the pay fortnights. The ministry staff assumed 1st August and had to retract and reissue contracts. That's where they made a mistake. So they've had to reissue contracts. School-based staff ending at term end or school year, what I mentioned to you earlier on. You cannot have it ending in the middle of the term. Either ends at the end of the term or at the end of the school year. Duration not to exceed 5 years. School-based staff, all others, balance of contract of up to 5 years. So we want people at the head office to get maybe have contracts up to 3 years. But you people need to have contracts up to 5 years. I think they probably flipped it around. So we need to correct that. We'll need to correct that. Contract renewal, as I said, automatic renewal. No school-based positions advertised if performance is acceptable. Okay? So when your contract expires at the end of 5 years, your position won't be advertised, your contract will be renewed. Unless, of course, you apply for a new position. Okay, you apply. So you're a senior teacher and you want to apply to become the principal of some other school. And you apply for that, then of course you will then sign a new contract because your salary has changed. Okay, I hope you're comfortable with that. Already the practice school-based position is not subject to the requirement for advertising on expiry. That's already the case in any case. So we're just simply following that. So there's a lot of misinformation, people saying, oh, because of contracts, you're not assured whether you'll get your job back or not. You will get your job. It's an automatic renewal. There's no issue. Unless, of course, like I said, you molested some student, spending your time in the grog bowl, whatever the case may be. Those are the things that will be held against you. And that deserves some sort of review. But other than that, most of you are actually doing the job and then you'll get an automatic renewal. Your job will not be advertised. In the meantime, of course, maybe, so you have a 5-year contract. I'm 3 years into my contract. And I decide, as I said, I want to apply for the position of assistant head teacher in some school. I can apply for that. And when I apply for that position, my contract then begins a new life of 5 years because my terms and conditions have changed. Okay? Next one, please. This is for the assessment list, yeah. Now, going forward, what we want to do is also give you the opportunity to have further pay rises. Okay, what we are moving into performance management systems. So we want to have ongoing assessment. This is where the Ministry of Education needs to actually focus. So we want to be able to reward the high flyers. So we are working now, the World Bank actually is very good. They've done it in many, many countries to set a benchmark or the guidelines regarding ongoing performance management. Ongoing performance actually. So the guidelines should be due by the end of 2017. And the objective in independent assessment, the criteria will be known in advance. You'll know the range of assessment tools, including implementing new curricula, student attendance, learning outcomes, achievement of school and ministry priorities. So it's not just about your performance. It could be about the performance in the school itself. It could be performance of various students in your school. Could be performance of a combination of factors. Give different weighting. Performance of the ministry itself. So if the ministry itself is able to implement, for example, a new curriculum overall, successful implementation, then overall all of you will be rewarded for that. So don't think that just because you're getting a salary now, you are just locked into that. So once we have performance management systems in place, there are opportunities in fact for you to get increments in your salary, every year, or every 2 years, every 3 years, whenever the assessment is done. I'm not saying it happen every year, but we have the opportunity to be able to look at the bands in which you sit and how you can be rewarded. So results will confirm movement up the steps in the salary bands, pay increases with the budget cycle, and renewal of contracts. Okay? But please feel free to come back to me and ask me questions on that. The next one, please. Now, this is where Jane will take over, and she'll take you through the... Oh no, sorry, this is my one. I wanted to show you this. Unfortunately, we don't have hard copies of this.
No, we can email them out.
Okay, what we've got, please make sure you put your email addresses in the front. We'll email these to you. Now, what I wanted to show you... yes, there we go. We don't have those pointers. Okay. Can we go down to the other side? The first, is that the first one? Okay. Okay. So, please bear with me. You are ED8A09, right? Band D. Your gross salary is $20,230. Okay? Your tax before the budget, you paid tax of $296.10. So your total take-home pay was $19,933.90 after tax. Now, after the JEE, these people who are here, they've got a salary rise of $22,567. That's your pay rise. Tax at 16,000 threshold, $522.07. Okay? Take-home pay is $22,000.45. So there's the difference. So net increase is $2,100. However, you now no longer pay tax because the income tax threshold has gone up to $30,000. So you now, the new salary, the gross salary of course, is the new gross salary, $22,567.00, no tax, after tax same salary, so you're actually getting an increase of $2,600. You get my drift? So those of you who are earning less than $30,000, the salary rise you've got is not just the salary rise to the JEE, but you also need to add the fact that you no longer pay tax. So your take-home money in the pocket is a lot more than the actual job increase. So I've done it for all of them. Maybe just take another one. Let's take one, a higher one. Can we go up, please? Okay, so, please go up. That's it. Okay, so, ED1D05, right? 42,691 before. Tax was $4,000. Gross pay $38,000. Now, you'll get a pay rise, goes up to $67,000. So you jump from 42 to 67 because of higher responsibility. 67 at 16,000 threshold, 9,000 tax, $58,000 gross. So next, please. No, go across. So now, 67,000, you pay a tax of $7,000, pay rise of $22,000. It's quite significant. So I know many of you want to get here. So you can see how significant it is. And hopefully that will inspire you to get more training, inspire you to do better. This is the whole point. The system works on the basis that if you do better, if you perform better, you will get the positions in a transparent basis and you get the right salary for it. Now I can tell you one thing I want to share with you. When we were meeting with the unions last year, they said to us, they call themselves the Public Sector Confederation Union, which is not actually a registered entity, but they all came together. And they said to us, they said, just give us 15% pay rise across the board. Give us 15% pay rise across the board. And I said to them quite clearly, these two ladies are my witnesses and there were others who were there. And I said, don't do that. Because you are actually probably shortchanging your own members. Because there would be positions that require salary increases of more than 15%. They said, okay, why don't we negotiate on the 15? So in other words, I could have said to them, okay, let's agree on 10. All of you would have got a 10% pay rise. You would say, yep, you do, we got a 10% pay rise. But the base would have just remained the same. The structure would have remained the same. In this way, we are able to recognize, you can see the increments that have taken place. ED05, 31,000. Sorry, what are you doing? Yeah. So, just over here, where am I? So, somebody's getting here, ED05, band 1, 42,000. Now gone up to 46,000. So, you know how we said that we've increased the tax threshold to 30,000? Don't just think that only people who earn less than $30,000 have got a tax cut. Everybody's got a tax cut. Because you see, the tax system works that way. You can't sort of have everybody up to 30,000 paying no tax and the next one starts at a higher level. It is a gradual thing. So everybody in Fiji actually has got a tax cut. But the people who've got the biggest windfall are those people who earn less than 30,000. So even people who earn more than $30,000, those of you who do at the moment, go and check your pay slip. You're actually paying less tax now. So it's across the board, but those people below $30,000 have got the biggest tax cut because they no longer pay any tax. So you can see the significant difference. So that's what the union said to us, and we said, no, we want to go through this particular process. And that's what we've achieved. And in fact, like I said, with the performance system, management system that we'll have in place, that will actually also increase significantly. You'll see many changes to your salary structures. What we are now able to do, as I mentioned to you, we're looking at things like meal allowances and various other issues, that how we can improve your learning environment, and also to help you with some of the smaller issues that we are confronting at the moment. Okay, you can ask me questions on that later on. So you can see over here, just keep it at that size. No, just keep it there. So you can see the increase in the salary goes up from 2,600 all the way to $22,000 if you take into effect the tax cuts that we have given. Okay, next one please. Next. Okay. This is the last one from my side. The job evaluation issues. Now again, when we were doing this assessment, as I mentioned to you, that we were given the wrong information by the Ministry of Education. Because you see, we are banding schools, and Jane can talk more about that. So when we, groupings of schools, you know, how many schools actually have students of up to 200, how many up to 500, 1,000, 800 and all of that. The information that was sent to CSRMU was actually misleading and unclear. So the assumptions that was made by us between enrollment, teacher numbers and school management was incorrectly given to us, so we came up with the wrong outcomes. Despite many meetings to discuss, not corrected until the release of the list. When we released it, then they said, oh, we made a mistake. Bands are now confirmed. The review of the jobs was conducted, particularly assistant head teacher, vice principal, education officers. Extensive work in CSRMU to map out all the current ED scales to the new bands. Jane will talk a bit about that. The district office headquarters wanted to have higher bands there. There's a huge struggle with that. But of course, we are saying no, because the core business is you people, not people in the head office. So one of the issues that was raised with me, they said, how can we go and, for example, assess a principal when his salary will be higher than mine? I said, it's okay. You can do that. Most of the permanent secretaries have a higher salary than the ministers. It doesn't stop the ministers from driving policy. So just because my salary is lower than somebody I'm going to assess, doesn't mean I can't do the job. because my level of responsibility is in a way much lower than the level of responsibility of the principal. Like I said to somebody from the head office, I said, when you come to work in the morning, there's only about 6 of you sitting there. Nobody needs to supervise you, and you don't need to supervise anybody else, right? But when the head teacher walks into the school, there's 500 screaming kids. You've got social issues. You've got to deal with the politics with the teachers. So there's a lot of issues. So the level of responsibility and the burden that's placed on a head teacher or deputy head teacher or even a senior teacher is far more than the education officer sitting in the Ministry of Education. So you need to be paid according to the level of responsibility you have. That's the point we made to them. They obviously don't seem to grasp that, but they'll have to grasp that because that's the new way of thinking. Okay? Next one, please. Okay. Jane will now take over and she'll take you through the job evaluation background. I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, we're actually very, very fortunate to have someone like Jane. Jane comes from Australia. We don't hold that against her, but she's from Australia. And Jane, in fact, first came to Fiji prior to 2014 through Australian aid when she came to actually help set up the HR side of the Fijian elections office. So she came under aid then, and she actually helped set up the structure. As you know, the Fijian elections office, unlike previously, before when you had elections, then the Fijian elections office, they used to poach people and then have the office set up. When the elections finished, people went away to wherever they came from. But now the Fijian elections office is a full-time office. So you had to build up the HR capacity. So Jane came in through then. We obviously saw her. We liked her work, and then we asked her to do this work for us, and we're very fortunate to have her. Please put your hands together for Jane.
Thank you, sir, and good morning, everybody. Thank you all again for coming this morning, and hopefully the information will be useful to you. So my part is to go through some background information so that you understand how the job evaluation actually happened. So there is a guideline. As with all of the work of the reforms, we develop guidelines and they get approved by the Public Service Commission. The job evaluation one was released in January 2017. It is available on the Public Service Commission website, so these documents are all publicly available. It was published back in January. All the rules around job evaluation are in that guideline. It's a fundamental change, bringing in what we call position-based pay. So the person and the position are considered quite separately. When the Honourable Minister talked before about performance assessment and performance management, that's how we assess you, the person in the job. Job evaluation is how we assess the job, and the two are considered quite separately. So the jobs are evaluated, not the person who's sitting in the job, and it's the requirements of the job that we look at, not what the person themselves might actually hold who's sitting in the job. And it's those requirements of the job that then determine the band that the position goes on to, and I'll talk more about that soon. Qualifications, this is always an important point for particularly teachers and other professions. Qualifications are only one factor that we consider when we evaluate a job. And I'm going to go through all of the factors with you, but qualification requirements are only one of the factors. So job evaluation is also based on competence. We make some assumptions when we evaluate jobs. We assume that the person who is going to sit in the job is competent to perform the work of the job. So we don't assess a job based on what might go wrong. We do assess a job based on the level of decision making that the person has to do and the level of complexity of that decision making, but we assume that they have the skills to be able to do that when we separate the person from the job. We also make the assumption that our workforce management is correct, so we don't evaluate a job based on volume of work. Okay? We assume that the ministry or the employer has organised the work in such a way that it is fair and that the work is distributed into full and equal jobs. So we don't evaluate a job that has more volume higher than a job that has less volume. Okay? We're looking at other factors, and like I said, I'm going to go through those. The methodology that the government has purchased, it's a commercial methodology, it's an international system, it comes from New Zealand, it's called SP10, because there are 10 factors. Okay. And I'll go through each of them. Some of you may be trained evaluators because we actually trained 200 people across the civil service, and some of them were teachers and principals and head teachers. The first factor is education, and it holds quite a high weight in terms of the evaluation. It's not the education that's held by the person who sits in the job, it's the education that the job requires in order to do the job. A point that we have been making quite often as we've been explaining the methodology is that if the person holds a higher qualification than that is required for the job, that does not attract additional pay. Okay? We would like to assume, that if a person has a higher qualification, they will perform better. That will therefore come through in their performance assessment, and they will be rewarded through the performance assessment system, because they will demonstrate that they use their qualification to benefit the outcomes of the position. Okay? This is particularly important for education because we know that in the past, all the pay structures, particularly for classroom teachers, were based on the qualifications that you hold. This new system, they are not. They are based on whether you are a primary teacher or a secondary teacher, because the jobs are different. And then your performance will be rewarded if you hold higher qualifications when you demonstrate that performance in the classroom. The next factor is experience. Again, it's the experience that's required in order to do the job. Some jobs, it takes 6 months to a year to become competent to be able to perform the job. Other jobs, you might need 10 or 15 years of experience before you can step into that type of role. So those different levels of experience have a score that attaches to them. Again, it's not the level of experience that the person who's sitting in the job has. It's not the length of time that the current individual has been in the job. It's the experience that's required for someone before they would be considered competent to perform that job. Complexity, this is where we start to get into decision making. Okay? So when we talk about, the level of risk, okay? It is about the level of risk, but we turn it around into the positive when we actually score the job. So we look at how predictable is the job? How easy is it to be able to perform the work? Is it routine? Do I have a set of procedures that I follow and it's the same every day? Or is every day a new and exciting adventure and I don't know what's going to hit me when I walk through the door? Okay? That's complexity. Scope is the next one. So scope is about, it links to education and experience, and it's about the breadth of control that you have over staff and resources. This one's particularly important if I look at the difference, for example, between a vice principal and a principal. So principals have overall responsibility for everyone who's in the school. Vice principals do have responsibility for people who report to them, but the ultimate responsibility is still with the principal. Okay? If something goes wrong, the vice principal has someone else to go to in that location. The principal doesn't. So therefore the scope of the work is different. Problem solving is linked to scope. So problem solving is about how much judgment is required, how many rules and regulations are available to guide the decisions that you make. You can see how these all start to link together. Okay? And when we actually use the methodology, it's done in a very complex spreadsheet that tells us if the scores don't match. So if we give a really high score for education and a really low score for problem solving, it'll flash up with a message at the end and say they don't match, you need to go back and have a look. Okay? But problem solving is everything that we do governed by rules and regulations. So if you're an accountant, okay, pretty much everything is governed by very strict rules and regulations. Some of these other factors are high, but the rules and regulations are pretty standard. In the classroom, you have some rules and regulations, but there's also a lot of problem solving that goes on. Kids are not as predictable as account books. Yeah? Okay, the next one is freedom to act. So the extent to which there's supervision or guidance under normal circumstances. Okay? If you're a classroom teacher in a normal school, you've got people that you can go to for guidance. Okay? You should have at least a principal or a head teacher. Generally, there's another structure in there as well. But if you're a decision maker, perhaps you're the head teacher in a tiny little school out in the maritime areas where it's you and 3 teachers and nobody else. Okay? Your freedom to act has to actually be higher, even though you're in a smaller school, because it's harder to get advice from people as to what you should do. Okay? The impact of your decisions. Again, we assume competence. It's really important that we talk about impact in terms of the effect on the organisation for the decisions that you make. Okay? So yes, it's about, can you make the organisation money? Can you save the organisation money? This is one that applies a lot more to the private sector, but it's still relevant in the public sector because we apply it equally across everybody. Okay. Your interpersonal skills. So the nature and degree of contact with personnel, clients, stakeholders. It's about who you talk to, how often, and in what capacity. Okay. Obviously, as teachers, you deal with your students all the time, you probably deal with parents all the time. But there are different levels of interaction. We talk about the levels of interaction. Are we there to provide information? Are we interacting and serving? Are the words that's actually used in the methodology? Are we persuading them to do something differently? Are we negotiating a major deal? Okay, so those different levels attract different scores for that factor. Then we have authorities. This is the formal authority of the position to spend money and to hire and fire staff. Now again, in the public sector, most people have no authority because there's no delegation. But the factor is still relevant because we apply it equally across everybody. Okay? Everybody gets a pretty low score because there's no delegations. Very few ministries have done delegations. But as supervisors, you all have some, although you don't hire and fire staff, you do supervise staff. And that also links to the last one, which is people management. So supervision and management of staff. There is a direct score depending on the number of staff who report to you. And it's not just the staff that report to you, it's also the staff that report to them. So it's not just the direct reports, it's the number of people you're responsible for. So in the Civil Service Reform Management Unit, we're quite small, but I only have one person who directly reports to me, and that's Bernie. But she has about 40 people who report to her, so my staff count is actually 41. Because I get to count all of hers as well. Okay. So in the schools, this is where we don't factor in enrolment. You would have seen there's no place there for enrolment. Okay. But those other factors do apply. Okay. And where enrolment comes in, and this is where we had the difficulty with the ministry, is that we told the ministry that we were going to fundamentally change the organisation and grouping of schools, that your current 29 scales were going to collapse into the bands. and we asked them for advice on how we could group based on staffing numbers. So it was enrolment leading to staffing numbers, leading to us being able to use these factors to assess the schools. And that's the information that wasn't clear, unfortunately, when it came from the ministry. It was a bit of, I thought I was speaking English, but I wasn't, evidently, when I asked the question. And in their defence, they thought they were answering my question, and it was that we weren't meeting in the middle. We thought that we understood each other, and we didn't. So where your enrolment comes in is that it directly leads to the number of teachers, which then we actually had assumed led to the number of head teachers and assistant head teachers, but it doesn't. It leads directly more to the number of, or to the level of different staff. Okay? So they're the 10 factors. So that's how we assess the jobs. The salary bands were actually developed quite independently of the job evaluation that was going on. There were two parallel activities that happened to make this all come together at the end. So the salary bands, there are 15 broad bands, and you all have a copy of the salary bands. This is the less crowded sheet. So where you used to have the 29 ED scales, they all now collapse onto these 15 bands. And so does the rest of the civil service. Everyone from a cleaner up to DepSec education is on these bands. At the top where you'll see there's an annual rate and there's an hourly rate. The hourly rate is there for the GWEs. Okay. The salary bands are benchmarked to the private sector. Now they're benchmarked, when we say that they're benchmarked to the private sector, it's the midpoint, step 4 of each band that is benchmarked back to the private sector. So in developing the bands, we had a World Bank review in 2016, which was the Benchmark Compensation Survey, where they collected data from a range of positions in the private sector, and then they compared them to similar positions in the public sector, and they said what the difference is. We also commissioned another report from the World Bank specifically for teachers and nurses, because we recognise that there's not much of a private sector for those occupations in Fiji. So we wanted them to do a study for us, not about what teachers and nurses earn in other countries, but a comparison around the region of what jobs earn similar amounts of money. Okay, so we have that report as well. And then when we tendered out for the job evaluation methodology, part of it is that we get salary survey data. So the job methodology comes from Strategic Pay in partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and PricewaterhouseCoopers do an annual salary survey in Fiji. So they have lots of data about what the public sector, what the private sector pays for various jobs, and because they use the same job evaluation methodology, they can also match and say, oh well, a band H job gets a range between this and this. So that's the midpoint that we have used to construct the scale, the new bands. So the rest of the steps are constructed around that midpoint. So we start by benchmarking the midpoint, and then we construct the steps on either side of the midpoint. When we started to look at the salary bands, because Cabinet had made a decision that we were going to benchmark to the private sector, at a level of 75%, and that's in the guideline. But when we started looking particularly at the lower bands, we found that we already pay more than that. So we couldn't really just say, oh well, we're going to benchmark 75% across all of the bands. So we developed a sliding scale. At the bottom of the bands, at band A, that midpoint is 110% of the private sector, and at the top, At band O, we're at about 60-65% of the private sector. So there's a sliding scale. And in the middle, we're at 100% of the private sector. Now, we're not ever going to be comparing like with like, because jobs are different. Okay? The way we work in the public sector is different to the way we work in the private sector. But it's one measurement. Okay? When we say that we benchmark to the private sector. Can you go and find exactly the same job in the private sector at exactly that money? No, because they're averages. Okay. So after the jobs were evaluated, they were placed on the relevant band. So using those 10 factors, we come up with a total score and it places them on a band. And of course, that determines the salary range for the position. So the copies of the bands are with you, and if you want additional copies, they're on the Ministry of Economy website. They were published the day after the budget was released, so they're public documents. So education, what happened with your positions? We did a detailed snapshot for you. That's the very busy sheet that you've all got, because we realise that it's quite confusing when you're moving from 29 different scales onto a much smaller number of bands, and it wasn't always a straight crossover. So not all of the ED8As went to the same place, because primary teachers went to one place and secondary teachers went to another. Okay. So that's what the snapshot is for. It is position-based. Okay, so it's quite clear. It starts with the position at the top and then the band, and then it lists down all of the old ED scales and where they would translate into the various steps on the new band. Remember, the bands were assigned based on the position, okay, not on the person. So principals and head teachers were grouped according to the number of staff in the school. And on the back of the snapshot, down the bottom, there's a breakdown of the definitions of what is a primary large. So we're talking about the school here, not the actual head teacher. I don't know if the head teacher's large or not. So a large primary school is defined as being over 25 teachers. Okay. A medium primary school is with either 1 or 2 assistant head teachers and up to 25 teachers, and a small primary school is no assistant head teacher. Secondary, the numbers are different because the school makeup is different. So in secondary, a large secondary school has more than 50 teachers. A medium secondary school has between 26 and 50 teachers, and a small secondary school has less than 26 teachers. And the bands are in brackets. And as you saw from Honourable Minister's slide before, the increases for some of those schools are huge. Okay? The increases in salary, particularly at the top, are very big. Movement from one band to another, so movement from a medium primary school to a large primary school, is through Open Merit. Okay, so the jobs will be advertised, you apply, and you win the position. So the snapshot shows for every single step in the old scales where you would go in your new band. So you know whether you're a primary or a secondary teacher, you know what step you were on before, there'll be a corresponding step on the snapshot to show where you should be going now. The steps were assigned based on the 15%. Okay? So the decision was made, automatic transition, if the increase was up to 15%. So if you think you're on the wrong step, the first thing to do is to have a look at the next step and see if it's more than 15%. Okay? And in most cases, that would be the reason that you're on the step that you're on. That's also the reason why there's different percentages for different people. I was crunching numbers on the weekend for something else, and there's actually 306 different variations across the civil service of percentages that people got, because there were so many different scales, so many different points that people were coming from to move on to these broad bands. For new appointments, anyone new coming into the civil service or into teaching or into any new position, the step is based on the degree to which they meet the selection criteria. Step 4, the midpoint, is what we call the fully competent point. So anyone who's fully performing, doing all the range of duties of the job, will eventually sit on step 4. So new people, logically, would move on to steps 1, 2 or 3. If you're on probation, then you're on probation. And the degree to which you meet the selection criteria determines whether you move on to step 1, 2 or 3 to start with. How much learning do you have to do when you first start in the job? And then performance assessment that we talked about before will determine how you then move on to higher steps in the band. So we mentioned before about advertising and redeployment and acting, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So all the positions where the increase was over 15% have to be advertised. Now, as you saw from a couple of those examples, those increases are up to 40 and 50%. It is reasonable that we want to make sure that we have the very best person in the job. That's not saying that the current person isn't that person, it's saying that we want to make sure. Okay. The snapshot identifies those positions, so you'll very easily be able to see the columns on the left-hand side show the band or the step that the position should go to. So anywhere where the increase is above 15%, there'll then be an entry in the columns on the right-hand side. Okay? So if it says 25% is the increase, on the right-hand side there'll be another column that shows the position that you've been assigned to substantively, so that's the position that your contract is issued at. That's where you know, if you're one of those people, if you're currently acting, if you don't happen to win the position at the higher band, that's the position that you go back to. Okay? So that was to make it clear for everybody what would happen to you if you don't win the position. Okay? You still have a salary increase and you still have a job. You still have a 5-year contract, but it's possibly a different job. But don't assume that you're not going to win the position. If you're sitting in it, then obviously merit applies. But if you are doing a good job, then you've got the front running because you're doing a good job, and you can use those examples in the selection process. So don't lose sight of that when the process starts. The Ministry should have, issued the contract and the acting letter at the same time. Yeah? Okay, because we wanted people to know that you're not going anywhere, okay? If you're sitting in a school, then you're still acting in that school, okay? But you need to know what your contract is as well as your acting letter. So if you're currently acting, people who weren't substantively in their schools and they're currently acting, this will continue, and that will now be swept up into the recruitment plan for the advertising of positions. That's all from my slides. Back to you, Sue.